Hi, I'm DuEwa Frazier, and you're listening to episode 29 of Nerdacity podcast. Today, my guest is Marilyn Nelson. She is the author or translator of more than 20 books and chapbooks for adults and children. Her critically acclaimed books for young readers include A Wreath for Emmett Till, Fortune's Bones, Carver, A Life in Poems, a Newbery Honor Book and recipient of the Boston Globe, Hornbook, and the Fiora Stieglitz Straus Awards. Her memoir, How I Discovered Poetry, is a Coretta Scott King Honor Book and was named one of NPR's best books of 2014. A three-time finalist for the National Book Award. Her many awards include the Frost Medal, the NSK Neustadt Award, and the Ruth Lilly Poetry Prize. Marilyn was Poet Laureate of Connecticut 2001 to 2006. Today, Marilyn discusses her new children's book, Papa's Free Day Party. Thanks for listening. Greetings, Marilyn.
Greetings, DuEwa.
How are you doing today?
I am fine, thank you. How are you?
Good.
Happy spring.
Oh, yes, happy spring. And thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast.
Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it. Thanks.
And congratulations on your new children's book, Papa's Free Day Party.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And so, Marilyn, it's such a treat to talk with you, as I know you have such a rich history in writing and also in working with other writers, as you were the director of Soul Mountain, a writer's retreat for many years. I'm so excited. I almost just don't know what to ask you first. But just in getting started, what has been your inspiration, your greatest inspiration as a writer?
Oh, my greatest inspiration. That's a good question. I suppose it's just that I was a reader, and I recognized early on how important it was for me to be able to read about things I didn't know, places I'd never been, people who were not familiar to me, and to learn how to value the importance of the written word. I guess that's probably the most important inspiration I can think of.
It's wonderful. And so did you grow up with, a lot of books around you, a print-rich environment, as people say, with your family and others encouraging your literacy?
I wouldn't say it was exactly a print-rich environment, but it was a literary environment, an environment that valued books. My father was a military man, and we moved a lot. So we didn't have a lot of books moving with us all the time. We had a small permanent library, family library that included a World Book Encyclopedia and several other sets of books that were published by that same company. And then, some collections of African American poetry, for example, and an anthology of English poetry that was always with us. But we were also people who used the libraries, and we very often lived on Air Force bases. And one of the first stops we made when we moved to a new base was the base library. So I remember pretty much reading my way through a couple of Air Force Base libraries, and then, of course, the libraries of the schools we went to, my sister and I. So In some ways, I suppose it was a print-rich environment, but it was symbolically print-rich, not literally.
Sure. And, I love how you mentioned libraries because I often think about so many writers, so many of us have a connection with libraries. It's a place where you could find so many books, and devour them at your heart's content. And of course, the libraries are free.
Yes.
Um, so, and it's really interesting how, they've been, mostly closed during this pandemic. And I often wonder, well, what were kids able to do, those who really depended on, using their library cards to check out new books? What has it been like for them?
Yeah, that's another good question. I suppose now the library is also a portal to the internet for a lot of people, including a lot of children. And closed libraries might have meant no access or limited access to all of the riches that are available through the internet. I don't know. I haven't needed to go to the library during this last year and a half, but I can imagine that there were a lot of people suffering from that loss of access.
Sure. Oh, it's certainly something to really, consider. And, Marilyn, I know that years ago you founded Soul Mountain. And can you talk about what that was like for you and really becoming, I would say, and maybe you have another term, but being a leader in the literary community to usher new writers and emerging writers and poets onto their journey to, writing and becoming prolific and published, certainly. And so what was that like for you, serving as director of that program?
Well, it was a kind of a fool's errand in many ways, as I didn't really know what I was getting into. I had had a dream for many years of having a place where creative people could gather. I think it started with one of Louisa May Alcott's novels, Joe's Boys. It's sort of the end of a sequence she wrote about the sisters, and Joe grows up and marries a German professor, and they have a big house, which is also a kind of a boarding school. And I think that's where this idea of having a big house into which I could invite creative people came from. And then the other source for me was the first summer I taught at Cave Canem workshop, which was the first time I had ever been in a community of African American writers, and that just blew my mind. And I those two sources grew together for me, and I was offered an opportunity to make this dream come true. And part of the part of the dream was not just to do an imitation of Cave Canem, but to do something similar that offered literary community to young writers of different ethnic backgrounds, so that they could be. Cave Canem is African American writers coming together. Wonderful thing. But I wanted also to be able to offer that opportunity, for example, to Native American writers, young Native American writers coming together and writing in community. And I had, over the course of the 10 years of the life of Soul Mountain, I had groups, as small groups because my place wasn't that big, but groups of 5 or 6 Asian American women, for example, or 5 or 6 Native American poets, or 5 or 6 African American poets, or Arab American poets. And this was the first time anyone had ever, to my knowledge, offered these groups the opportunity to be together as writers, as poets, and to talk about their common dedication to their group and to telling their stories, and to allow them to share in this way. Usually, if you go to a writers' colony as a member of any group, any ethnic group, you get there and there are maybe 40 or 50 people, and one or possibly two who belong to your ethnic group. And what I offered was the possibility of being together with a group of people with whom you shared this common background. So it was it was a great experience for me, and I hope it was a great experience for the 100 or so young writers who came and stayed with me as my house guests. And during the time, I had enough funding to be able to offer these residencies as an honor, a gift, not have to charge them for anything, so they could come and stay with me for maybe a couple of weeks or 3 weeks without paying anything. I was even able to pay their transportation. And I don't know, I felt that one of the other sources of this for me was the thought that literary honors are bestowed on young writers by organizations or individuals who have money.
Mm.
And I don't have money, didn't have money, and most of our people don't have the kind of money that could offer somebody a $25,000 fellowship. But what I could offer was a free 2-week residency, which could be listed as an honor in a curriculum vitae. And you know how it is. You have one honor, and that one honor turns into two, and then you have two honors, and those two honors turn into more, because people who look at your CV say, "Oh, look, she got such and such. She must
Mm-hmm.
be good." So that was the other impetus for me, was being able to give honor to writers, being able to bestow honors, and to bestow honors as an African American woman. And
Wow.
it was a great joy. It was a lot of work, but it was a great joy for me to do that.
And this was, as I'm, looking again at your bio, thank you for sharing that, Marilyn, that you were founding director of Soul Mountain Retreat, a writer's colony, from 2004 to 2010.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm looking at those years and I'm like, wow, I so wish I could have been a part of that. There was 1 year in that I was doing my MFA at the New School. And I'm like, that's why you don't know me, because I was in school during that whole time. Before that, my master's in education. And so I'm like, wow, I could have certainly used a retreat to write. But my head was in the books at that time, and I wasn't heavily connected And so I certainly appreciate what you're sharing about what Soul Mountain did for writers of color. And as you mentioned, Cave Canem, we know the great support that Cave Canem lends for writers of color, particularly Black writers,
Mhm.
Caribbean writers, writers of African diaspora. And so, you have served as, one of those people, like not only I'm in awe of not only your prolific work, but that you've been able to continue your own work while also supporting other writers to kind of, move them along in their journey, as you mentioned, where they otherwise, probably would not have received it, you
Uh,
know.
well, I don't know whether they would or wouldn't, but it felt like, I don't know, one of the Native American residencies I had, um, someone told me that this is the first time anyone had ever invited anyone who's not Native had ever invited Native American writers into their home like this, and it was, as I say, it was a great joy, and to be able to be invited into which are not cultures. And the year after I had the first Arab American residency at Soul Mountain, I was invited to the convention of the Arab American Writers Community, which is called Rawi. Not
Mm.
sure why, but in any case, I was invited to the conference, to the convention, and everyone was introducing me as our sister Marilyn. It was such an honor.
Wow. Mm.
Beautiful thing. So,
It's amazing. And Marilyn, now coming back to your own writing, um, so prolific. You're the author or translator of more than 20 books and chapbooks for adults and children. You've written many young adult books, including A Wreath for Emmett Till, Fortune's Bones, My Seneca Village, and the groundbreaking Carver, A Life in Poems, a Newbery Honor Book, as well as a recipient of many other awards, and also have published 9 poetry collections for adults. And you are a 3-time finalist for the National Book Award. And can you tell me you have lived a life in writing? Like when someone says, well, how's your life been? And what have you been focusing on? You are books, you are poetry. Um, and so as a woman writer, as an African American writer, how has your journey been? I would say, even what have you learned about yourself through your journey as a writer, and witnessing your own being truly validated in the literary community by a number of honors and recognitions? How has that been for you?
uh, hmm. I guess I can say that there's a scene in some movie, like maybe it's an Indiana Jones movie, where they're walking across a bridge that they can't see, and they have to, it's the floor of the bridge is invisible,
Mm.
and they have to trust that it's there before they take a step. And I guess that's what life is in general, but it's also what it's been for me to be a writer. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just making one small decision at a time. I don't have a grand vision, and I don't really know where I'm going. I'm just taking one step at a time. The fact that I got really a reputation as a writer of young adult books is a complete happenstance, a coincidence. I was working on a biography of George Washington Carver, and I was about halfway finished with it, and I went to one of my previous books was a finalist for the National Book Award, and I was at the National Book Award gala, and I ran into someone whom I had known several years before, and he had become an independent publisher in the meantime, and he published only books for young adults and children. And, I said, "Hi, how are you doing? Oh, let's do a book together." Publish books for children and young adults. And I thought, oh, no, that's not what I want. I don't want to be stuck over there in that little corner. But I liked him. And so I started looking through my files and seeing whether I had written anything appropriate for that audience. And I sent him everything I had written, and he said, "No, I don't like this. This is garbage. I don't like this. I don't like this." And finally, I showed you everything I have. The only thing I have left is the project I'm working on now, which is this serious biography of George Washington Carver, but it's not for children. I'm writing it as just a book of poems for adults.
Mm.
Said, "Let me see it," and I sent it to him. It was a half of a book, and he said, "This is the one I want."
Wow.
I don't know.
What do you call that? Is that serendipity?
Oh, yeah.
Boy.
Yeah, but I wasn't going to say yes. And they said, "Well, let's talk about an advance."
Yes, now we're talking.
4 books, and nobody had ever mentioned that word before. So that's what started me in that publishing world, and it's been a truly lucky happenstance. It's wonderful to write for younger writers. The audience is welcoming. The community of other writers for young adults is so generous and welcoming, and not, I don't know, I find poets sort of envious of each other. And I don't think the same thing is true in that young adult author world, or even in the children's book world. And I'm very happy there. I've been really happy in that world, and I guess I finished that sentence.
Oh, that's wonderful. And do you feel like there is a focus at children's writers, especially those of us who are from diverse backgrounds, a particular focus that we should have, just in terms of in the recent years, the last several years, the focus on a need for greater diversity in children's publishing, diversity of who the authors are, as well as diversity of subjects and the protagonists in the stories. Do you find that there should be a particular focus in that at this time?
Well, I'm sure it's there's a kind of reassurance and validation for young readers to find books by authors with whom they have something in common. I've been thinking a lot about this lately because somebody recently asked me whether I read books by African American authors when I was a child. And I don't know if there were any. I certainly don't remember reading any.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I found characters to identify with anyway. I remember one of my favorite books when I was about 11 or 12 was by A.J. Cronin, an Irish writer. The book is a novel, not even a young adult novel, but a novel called The Green Years, about northern, maybe it's about an Irish boy whose mother dies, and he has to go and live with a relative in Northern Ireland, and he has to deal with the ethnic religious differences between Northern Ireland. One of them is Catholic, and the other one's Protestant. One of them wears green and has green as their special color. And this boy winds up in sort of in the opposing camp. I must have read that book 3 or 4 times, identifying with this Irish boy who was an outsider in his community. He was an outsider because he was Protestant, I think. I don't remember it now. But he was an outsider because of religious difference, not because of color. But his difference was something I could find myself in. And as for now, I'm really pleased that there are so many opportunities for young readers of pretty much any group now to find characters with whom they can identify. I'm a little bit sorry that so much of what's being offered to young African American readers is sort of inspiring historical stories, or inspiring Black heroes, and kind of like to see a little bit more of lightness, light humor, maybe family stories, maybe.
Sure.
But I suppose that will come. So,
hopefully so.
Yeah.
And it makes me think about an article I read a few years ago that asked, where are children's books about nature featuring Black children? Like, don't Black kids like nature and like to play outside too?
Yeah. Would like to see that. I'm sure there are some, but I don't read everything, so I don't know everything that's available. But yeah, I would have been. I think that the rise now of Afrofuturism offers some possibilities. I don't know whether anybody's writing science fiction with an African American cast for young readers, but that seems to me to be a possibility too. So,
sure, certainly.
Mm.
And now thinking about your children's book, Marilyn, Papa's Free Day Party. It's such a beautiful book. The illustrations are very rich. The story is very rich. I mean, it just really makes you want to dive in, and you can picture just the retelling of what Papa went through.
Yeah.
So I wondered, of course, without me, I don't want to give, too much away. And congratulations again. This is a new release, as new as April, April of this year, 2021. But what can you tell me about your inspiration? And wow, even these wonderful photos in the back of the book. And wow, there's just so much here.
I'm so pleased that the publisher decided to include the historical photos. Yeah, this is the story of my mother's father. And it's just stories, little pieces of his life that my mother would sort of mention. Oh, yeah, Papa so-and-so and Papa's. And I just had held on to these little pieces of his life story in the back of my mind since childhood, and thought maybe someday I'll know enough about his story, to be able to write it. And I tried over the course of many years to write the story and just didn't feel I knew it well enough. And so this is Papa's Free Day is the final attempt to piece together the little pieces of the story I had grown up with. And I'm really pleased it happened. I mean, I knew that his parents' home place was set on fire by night riders.
Mm-hmm.
He was an older father. He was born in, I think, the 1880s. And so, okay, I knew that he was an older father for my mother. I knew that his parents' place had been set on fire and that he had been told to run north when he was about 5 or 6 years old. I knew that he had been taken in by a white family that just found him
Mm-hmm.
and took him in and raised him with their son. And I knew that he and this other boy, this white boy, were very close, and that he had had some kind of encounter with some racists as a young man, and had gone home to his adoptive family and told them about it, and they had said, "We've got to get you out of town to save your life." And he wound up in Boley, Oklahoma, which was my mother's pride, that she was born and raised in Boley, Oklahoma, which was one of several all Black incorporated towns in Oklahoma and Kansas. And Boley was one of the largest and most successful of these Black towns. And my mother, you couldn't have a conversation with her without her telling you that that's where she came from. She was terribly proud of this. And so I put those pieces together to tell this story. And then it, by another wonderful coincidence, shortly before the book was published, I decided to try to find the white family who had raised my grandfather.
I see that note here. And would they be the Bryants?
Yes, yes.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Farmers in southern Missouri. And I knew their last name was Bryant. I knew the town where my grandfather had been raised, but the Bryants no longer live there. But I contacted the Missouri State Historical Society and told them what I was looking for, Bryants and this area, and they found them. And that has given me and them so much joy, because they knew the story also.
Wow.
Grandfather had a Black brother.
Mm.
And yeah, so the for me, the important pieces of the story are the fact that the family was burned out by the night riders, and that my grandfather as a child was taken in by this family of strangers, and that he wound up in this Black town. All of those are, each one of them could be a story in itself, I think. And so it gave me great joy to write the story and have it published. And the publishers of Just Us Books are Cheryl and Wade Hudson, and they're
Yes.
so helpful. to me, helping me figure out how to put the pieces together,
Mm-hmm.
how to put the story together. I'm infinitely grateful to them for helping me, because I had been struggling with this for a long time.
Wow.
To the story that didn't get told in the book.
Such a beautiful book. And I must say, I'm looking at this peach pie, and it really makes you want to like dive in and take a piece. Just the richness of the illustration. It's like it reaches out to touch you, both, literally and figuratively.
Right.
So, and what was your collaboration with the illustrator? Were you, I guess, in contact with them about your vision?
Yes, there were a couple of things, suggestions I made about things like hairstyles of the women, or just a couple of things. I said I think the little girls would have had braids, and
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember small things, but his vision is very good. I think I think the first one of his paintings I saw was one in which the little boy is in the garden eating a carrot, and this white man's hand is on his shoulder.
Yes.
Yeah, and I thought, wow, that is just perfect.
Right. And when I looked at that, I was like, oh my gosh, I would just feel so terrified. And he's looking like, OMG. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really, 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 really jumps out at you.
Yeah.
And so, Marilyn, do you have just a brief excerpt that you'd be comfortable sharing with us?
This is sort of the middle of the story. It's a family of 4. They're living in Foley, Oklahoma. My mother is a little girl named Johnny, and she doesn't understand why her father doesn't know his birth date. And it's a family of 5. She doesn't understand why he doesn't know his birth date, and that's where this starts here. He has told about the fire and how he was separated from his parents and how he wound up being raised by the Bryants. And so this is the next evening. The next evening, when they'd finished chores and settled down together, Johnny was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Papa, it's sad that your mama and Papa weren't ever with you on your birthday, but I bet they remembered." "Yes," Papa said, "if they survived." He sighed and was quiet. Then Johnny asked, "Papa, can we give you a birthday? Can we make one up? Everybody ought to have a birthday cake." "I already have me a made-up birthday," Papa answered. "The Bryants always celebrated my birthday on April 9th, the day Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox and the war for freedom was won. On that day, slavery was pretty much all she wrote. Mr. and Mrs. Bryant used to give me a little present every April 9th. I remember one year they gave me a pretty little pearl-handled jackknife. I had that knife for years. Don't know what happened to it." "But that's not your birthday," Johnny said. "That's your free day. Can we have a free day party for you then, Papa? With a cake and frosting and sweet tea and a red balloon?" "Yes, indeedy," John laughed. "With cake and frosting and sweet tea and a red balloon." So that's the end of one of the page spreads
Wow.
of the book.
I love that. And something you said there about, Papa not, or the kids don't know his birthday, it does make me think about those remnants of slavery
Yeah,
and how, so many Black people at that time did not end up having those kind of records, births, certificates of birth, and things like that.
exactly, exactly, exactly. I don't know how long you want to talk, but I'm working right now on a project that's it's such a wonderful project. The town I live in Connecticut, and the town of Old Lyme, Connecticut, which is a prosperous shoreline town where a lot of sea captains and prosperous ship boat builders lived back in the 17th and 18th centuries, and a lot of them had slaves. And the town has decided, as a part of a program called Witness Stones, to do research about the people who were enslaved in this town and to put their names and information on stones and place these stones along the main street of Old Lyme. And I'm working on this project with three other African American women poets. We're writing poems about the enslaved people, the people who are being discovered now for the first time. We're giving them voices and telling their stories. And it is so interesting. I mean, we're finding forgotten stories. People,
Mm.
really, you said their birth information of enslaved people got lost. I mean, all of their information was lost.
Right.
And to have it uncovered and handed to you as a resource. Would you write a poem about one of the people I've just written about? His name was Samuel Freeman. God, yeah, okay. He was enslaved for about 35 years. And then he decided he wanted to be free and was free. And a lot of people in New England, when they were freed, they didn't have a way of making a living. They were like homeless people, street people. Samuel Freeman was one of the lucky ones who was able to work and make enough money and buy a house and some land, and his people, his family were well off. But there was somebody else who was found frozen to death along the road in this town in the early 18th century. It's just it's just so moving and such a gift to be asked to write this. We're working with a woman who's a historian. She's
Wow.
doing the research for us. She's handing us information so we don't even have to dig it up. It's wonderful.
Oh, that is wonderful. And it sounds like you're really enjoying this process.
Oh, it's I can't express my enthusiasm enough. It's one of the people I've written about is a woman who her name was Temperance. She was born in about 1720. She was they called them mulattoes, half African and half native.
Mm-hmm.
She fell in love with an African enslaved man. They wanted to marry, but the native people were not enslaved for life. The Africans were enslaved for life. Native people could be something like indentured servants, but they were not slaves. But she wanted to marry this man who was a slave. So there is a document in which she signs over her freedom. She sells herself into slavery. And there's a little place that says, I sign Temperance, and there's an X where she signed X. to sell herself into freedom, into slavery.
Wow.
A few days after she signed this document, there is another document in which she was married to this enslaved man. And I'm sorry I'm going on about this, but
No, it's okay. It's totally, yeah, I love to hear it.
About 5 years after her selling herself and marrying, she tried to sue the master for wages.
Wow.
Didn't understand that she was supposed to be a slave.
Mm.
So, of course, she lost the lawsuit, and she worked for the same master for another 5 years. So she's been 10 years with her husband in this household as a slave. During this time, she and her husband had 4 children. And then after 10 years of working for this man, the master announced that he had sold the 2 of them, the husband, the wife, and their youngest child, who was a baby, and keeping the other children.
Whoa.
Yeah.
But you know what's crazy? And I don't know if this is my mind after reading slave narratives. And I'm thinking, wow, surprised he didn't sell them separately. Wow, he had enough heart to allow them to stay together.
Stay together and with the baby.
And with the young and with the baby.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. He could have been. It's true.
Because really, and it's a shame that you think, wow,
yeah,
at least he allowed them to stay together, even though that was still, terrible.
That's heartbreaking to think that we have to give him credit.
Yes.
For being kind when he was really a monster.
Yes, Marilyn, that's what I'm saying. And I'm like, wow, I feel bad, but I'm like, it's only because of the many narratives that I've read and what we know about slavery.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, that says something, because this was New England slavery, and from the what I've read about New England slavery, it was slavery, but it wasn't the kind of huge numbers that were owned by plantations.
Southern plantations. Yep.
Very different from what was going on in New England in the 17th and 18th century. They were most enslaved people were household servants or tradesmen, people who were boat builders or blacksmiths or something like that. They weren't field hands, and I think that may make a difference. I don't know. I'm not a scholar, but I'm so in love with these stories. And
Can I ask you, why did is it because she sued him for wages? Why did he choose to sell them at that point that they had been with him so long, and then, with their youngest baby? What was did you find the reason for that?
You can only make inferences, and I think her attempt to sue him, and of course she couldn't because she was a woman, first of all, and because her husband would have had to do the lawsuit in her name, but her husband was enslaved.
He was a slave himself, right?
Yeah. So I think she walked around mad for the next 5 years. That's all I can imagine. What would it be like to have somebody, I'm thinking of it from the point of view of her master now and his family.
Right.
Have this woman in your household as a household servant who's walking around giving you sidelong glances and, mad all the time. I just imagine they couldn't live with it anymore. Live with her rage.
Yeah.
That must have been what motivated the decision to sell them. And I suppose they let them take the baby because keeping the baby would have been more work for them.
Sure. And because the baby couldn't work.
Exactly.
You know, what are they going to do?
Exactly.
Yeah, unfortunately, but
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. I mean, I'm going to be thinking about that all day today.
Well, good.
Like, Marilyn, wow, it's like, I mean, that's a real history. That's a real project. I mean, it's how long have you been working on this?
We started it during maybe not the whole length of the pandemic, but several months, 7 or 8 months, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Working on it with Antoinette Brim Bell and Rhonda Ward and Kate Russian.
Oh, mm-hmm.
And they're all really good poets, and everybody, all of us are just in the sky with joy for being invited to do this. It's all of us are just high off of it. And we're having a Zoom meeting this evening to talk about where we've gotten to. The stones are to be unveiled on June 4th. So, yeah, we're really happy about it.
And have you found a home for it?
For the writing project?
Yes.
No, not yet. We haven't quite decided.
Sure.
Some of a couple of them want, for them it's turning into a book-length project in their imagination.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So interested in this person, I might write a whole book about him. So we'll probably talk about this evening. Right now, the original idea was that each of us would write poems about 4 people, and I've been thinking of it chapbook just for the town of Old Lyme, but it's possible that we'll keep going and turn it into I don't know, an actual. I don't know. I don't know where it's
sure. Going. And I can certainly understand. It's moving though. The momentum is there. The excitement is there, and whatever it will be wonderful.
Yes.
Because the 3 of you are really putting your energy and your love and time and commitment into it, and I mean, I just take my hat off to you for that.
And the fact that we're working with this historian, we've been to the graves of some of these people. Then we've poured libations over their tombstones.
Wow.
I went to, just by luck, I visited the home in which Temperance and Oxford were enslaved for 10 years. I was in the house. I was in the attic where they probably lived, and in the cellar where the kitchen is. There's a huge fireplace along one wall. She must have cooked.
I'm sure.
Place.
Oh yeah.
What a privilege to be able to see things that they saw. It's
to be invited for their stories to come through you.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I feel that. Wow, that's amazing. I almost, you know what? And Marilyn, I almost forgot my question. One of my questions, which was to ask you, how has the pandemic affected or impacted your writing or your creativity? But you kind of just answered that because you have been working.
At first, I couldn't write anything, and I spent the first few months. I lived in Denmark for a year, many years ago, and became friends with a woman who became a quite well respected author. And she died a couple of years ago, and we loved each other. And
Mm-hmm.
I decided to translate one of her novels as an homage to her. So at the beginning of the pandemic, that's what I did. Every day I got up and translated a couple of pages of her novel, and that work got me through several months of the pandemic. And then when that was finished, I didn't do anything until this Witness Stones project appeared. And I find it very hard to generate. Well, I don't generate work of my own anyway. I mostly do research.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have a project for a long time. I was just twiddling my thumbs for a few months until this new project appeared. Um, but yes, I don't understand how people can write during this. I just found I didn't have anything to say.
Sure.
Yeah.
And my understanding, there are some people who were like, okay, I'm just going to chronicle the pandemic every day,
Right.
like,
Right.
so they turned it into some blogs, essays, or poems about, what's going on with all of this. So that's a whole nother thing.
Yes. Yeah.
But sounds like you definitely have something to really, dig into right now, which is great.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, Marilyn, how can we best support your work right now? In terms of your audience, your friends, your fans?
I suppose. Well, obviously, buying books or sharing books, uh, or I don't know if people do reviews. Would be nice. That's all I can think of is sharing books means a lot, or telling people that you've read something that might be worthwhile, um, recommending things. Look forward to my next project. I have two things coming out uh, this coming year, which I'm excited about and proud of. So, Papa's Free Day party is out now.
Yes.
Uh, I'm looking forward to seeing somebody review it. I haven't seen any yet. And then in November, I have a collaborative book coming out, which is a book I wrote with Lara Auerbach, who is a Russian born poet and classical composer. And I don't know, we were having dinner together in New York one evening, and she said she'd really like to write a children's book. And I said, well, why don't you do it? And she wrote a couple of little poems for it and sent them to me, and I started fiddling with them the way you do, I'll move this here and change that. And then I thought, if I'm going to spend any time on this, I think I should just be a co-author and we should write the whole thing together. So we wrote this book together. It's called A is for Oboe, the orchestra's alphabet.
Mm.
And it's verses about the orchestra. And she's a composer, and she's also become a conductor. She's very well respected in the music world, and she's known as a poet in Russia because she writes in her native language. I don't know anything about the orchestra, but I was able to help her shape her thoughts into verses in English, and we worked together really well. And I'm very excited about this book. And then next spring, I have a book that I actually wrote. That's a biography of the great African American sculptor Augusta Savage.
Oh, yes.
That's going to be, I hope, that's coming out next spring.
That's so interesting. The poet, Tyehimba Jess was speaking of her when I interviewed him.
Oh no.
She no, only because I think she was touched upon. She's mentioned in Olio, I think, his second collection, and we talked briefly about her.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And I both wrote long poems about the McCoy sisters, the conjoined twins.
Yes.
And okay, we've both written about those subjects, and I just hope he hasn't written a whole lot about it.
No, I don't think so. It wasn't, from what I gathered. It's just you jogged my memory, and I'm like, whoa! I went from not hearing about this person to this person coming up twice in 1 month.
I see.
Right. I just thought it was really interesting. Yeah.
I had my Tyehimba Jess story. I was invited to give a reading at a writer's conference, and I said, I've just finished this long poem about the McCoy sisters, and I know that Tyehimba Jess, a young African-American poet, has also written about the McCoy sisters. Why don't you invite him too, and we can both read our poems, and it will be, people can see how we both have dealt with the same subject. So they did this, and on the day of our presentation, I read my poem. No, on the day of our presentation, I said, Tyehimba, why don't you read first, because you're younger.
Okay.
My first poem was in Olio, and it's a 5, he calls it something kind of sonnets, I can't remember. 5 of these syncopated sonnets, which are printed on a large double spread in his book. And there are 5 of them, so it's kind of shaped like a star. And he demonstrated that he had written his poem so that you could read each one from the first line to the last line, and it made sense. Or you could read each one from the last line backwards up to the first line, and it made sense. Or you could read the first line of the first one over to the first line of the second one, and the second line of the first one over to the second line. So you're reading across the page, and it made sense.
And it made sense.
Diagonally, and it made sense. And every time he read, he explained a little bit and read, everybody went, oh. And then he finishes, and then it was my turn to read. It was so humiliating.
Oh, no.
Here's my nursery rhyme about the McCoy sisters. But he's wonderful. He's incredibly talented. Okay, enough about Tyehimba.
But this just goes to show the 6 degrees of separation in the poetry community and in the, just in the literary world. I think it's fantastic just that, regardless of the generation you're in, that there is still a connection,
Right. And also, there is history, and for those of us who are fascinated by history, African American history, there's only so much history. There are stories that you can tell over and over again, and each time you tell them, you find something new in them. So there's nothing wrong, I think, with approaching the same story from different angles, seeing the same story with different eyes.
Truly, I really appreciate that, Marilyn, because it's something that I often wonder about. When you think about submitting the agents, sometimes, they might ask, well, who else has written, a lot of times they want to know, well, what's a similar, well, and thinking about children's books and that genre, even young adult, well, who's written a similar book? What are the books that are similar? And I've always thought, well, that's really interesting because it makes me think, well, if it's already been done so many times before, then why would I want to do that? If,
you have different eyes. The one experience I had as a translator in DuEwa is I translated some poems by a very great Danish poet. Danish is my translation language. I had translated a whole book's worth of poems, which nothing ever really came of them. And then probably 15 or 20 years later, I was putting together a book of my own poems, and I thought, one of those poems I translated would fit really nicely into this section about this theme. I should find that translation and use it. And I looked everywhere for it and couldn't find it. So I found the Danish version and did a second translation of the poem so that I could use it. And after I had done this second translation, I found the first translation. And I don't believe there was a single word that was the same in these two translations.
Wow.
So both of them had come from my mind. I had changed so much in the intervening time that I didn't even use the same vocabulary. And I think that says something about the necessity of trusting that two people's versions of the same story might very well be very different. And, pretending that, two versions are going to be too repetitive is wrong, I think.
So. Wow, it's certainly good advice and a really it's a perspective that's needed.
Hope so. I hope so.
Wow.
Start writing a children's book about a little stuffed bear named Pooh. We'll see whether that goes over.
Wow. For sure. Well, young readers, they need it all.
Yes.
Marilyn, it's certainly been so wonderful speaking with you today. And where can we find you? How can we continue to follow you and be, aware of everything that you have in the works?
Oh, well, there is a website, Marilyn-Nelson.com, but it's never upgraded. It hasn't been updated in a couple of years. But it has basic information, and I'm not too much of a presence in the virtual world. I am active on Facebook, but that's not really about me and my work. It's just fun.
Oh yeah. So, staying connected to people.
Right. So I don't do a lot of I don't know how to say this.
The Twitter, and the
yeah, I hope people will find me and my books. I really hope people will find me and my work because it's serious. And even the things that I write for children are serious. I have another picture book that came out recently called Lubaya's Quiet Roar.
Oh.
Beautiful picture book, beautiful pictures.
Mm-hmm.
And that is another book that it's a serious book, which I think children's books should offer enough engaging material that parents can find them interesting, and that there's stuff for parents to discuss with young children. And I hope that's true of both of these recently published Marilyn Nelson books, that there's enough meat in them to chew on for a while.
I'm sure they are. I mean, I can really see Papa's Free Day Party being not only, heavily stocked and featured in the libraries, but, in classrooms. Hopefully, if these schools should open up this fall, hopefully teachers will add this to the library, especially for the younger children, for the read alouds and things like that.
I hope so. Thank you. That's what I hope. One of my friends, very great children's book writer, said that one of the things she likes about Papa's Free Day is that it offers a possibility for white children to find a role model as well. A white child can say, well, maybe I could be like the Bryants. I could have that kind of openness and welcome that family had. And she said that she thinks this is a very important gift to offer, so that there is an intrinsic gift to African American children in the story, but there's also an implied gift to white children in the story, which makes me happy too.
Wow. Yeah. That's profound. Certainly, I really appreciate it. And having that visual of the photographs at the end really kind of drives that home. It makes the story even more real to see, those artifacts.
Right. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Wow. Well, Marilyn,
thank you for this.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and I will continue to follow your wonderful work, and we'll be promoting this podcast and Papa's Free Day Party by Marilyn Nelson and illustrated by Wayne Anthony Steele, published by Just Us Books. So congratulations again.
Thank you, DuEwa. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you so much, Marilyn, and do take care. And you were just listening to episode 29 of Nerdacity Podcast, featuring Marilyn Nelson, who is the author of the new children's book, Papa's Free Day Party, published by Just Us Books. You can visit justusbooks.com or visit their Facebook page for more information on this wonderful new title. I hope that you will follow Nerdacity Podcast on Instagram, and that will be at Nerdacity Podcast. Tweet me and follow on Twitter as well at NerdacityPod1. If you've been enjoying these episodes, consider supporting future episodes by giving a small donation at paypal.me/DuEwaWorld or by sending to anchor.fm/DuEwaFrazier/support. And lastly, visit my artist and author website, DuEwaWorld.com. Thanks so much for listening. Take care.